Warm greetings, everyone. On behalf of W4W Foundation, a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective, we welcome you to another session of Wednesdays for Water. This conversation today is on Myristicaceae, India's Primeval Wetland Forest. But before we get into the conversation, a quick overview of Wednesdays for Water. The objective of the series is to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policymakers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues associated with water and the possible solutions they are seeking and working on. The Wednesdays for Water has expanded since then to have more activities like the Friday Waters and the Monday Munching with Women for Water, besides organizing on-site water workshops, water walks and talks, seminars, special courses, conference panels, and publications to continue the water conversation in various possible ways. Interestingly, in Friday Waters, we also do water arts, water thesis club, water book reading club, meeting a maestro, and water films. At W4W, we strongly believe that water conversation is the only way to move towards water conservation. Do visit our website, www.w4w.in, for more details. My name is Mansi Bhargav, and I am today just taking a back seat and co-host for the session, which is Myristicaceae, India's Primeval Wetland Forest, which is co-hosted by Mahseer Trust, and I'm honored to invite Steve Lockett to moderate the session. Before I hand it over to him, a quick overview of Steve. Steve is an executive director and has been an integral part of many projects run by the Mahseer Trust since 2012. He's a lifelong freshwater conservationist and brings experience from his parallel careers in entertainment and hospitality, photojournalism, and teaching, just to name a few, besides his keen interest in ecology. With many Mahseer range countries, I think Steve is going to highlight more about the Mahseer, but do visit their website, which is www.mahseertrust.org. I'm going to put all the details there. Thank you so much, Steve, for taking out time and also volunteering and reaching out to us for co-hosting this session, and hope to have more sessions with you in future. Over to you, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mansi. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've visited a few of the Wednesdays for Water sessions, and it's a great honor to be here as part of what is becoming a very serious and comprehensive collection of webinars, which are recorded, are available on the YouTube channel, addressing all kinds of issues affecting water. So a little about me. I won't really touch on Mahseer today because we have a session planned to come up in August. But during my journey into river conservation on behalf of Mahseer fishes, it became obvious to me that a single issue focus never really addresses problems in a sustainable way. So I began to look for those who work on areas of common interest, so those connections, and I also broadened my vision to encompass whole river basins and the landscapes that surround them. Very important to me because of where I spend a lot of my time in India. In the Western Ghats, if you follow a river upstream, you should inevitably reach a Myristica swamp. These ancient freshwater habitats are the birthplace of rivers. So to discuss their importance, I've chosen three people who, respectively, study frogs, otters, and the ecohydrology of these unique wetlands. Two of the three I've worked with on issues affecting Myristica swamps. And the third I've never previously had contact with. So this is a networking session for us just as much as it is for the audience. So the speakers in the session are Madhushri Mudke, who I've worked with a few times, but only remotely. And when I mentioned previously about working in common areas and connections across river basins, I've had the pleasure to host other webinar sessions when Madhushri has been my go-to person to discuss Myristica or frogs, amphibians in the Western Ghats in particular, but also specifically in the Kaveri River Basin. Gopakumar Menon, who is a friend of long standing, and we have had the pleasure to squelch together through a Myristica swamp. So it's a delight to be here with Gopa once again. And Priya Ranganathan, who previously I'd never met, but the minute I saw her book was being published, I thought, yeah, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this with her. So to get the session underway, I'm going to invite our first speaker, Madhushri. Madhushri is a conservationist and a researcher. She currently works as a senior research coordinator and a postdoctoral fellow with the India-based wildlife conservation NGOs Olamate Nature Foundation and Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. She has a PhD in conservation science and sustainability studies with over 20 published scientific and popular science articles. And I'm very pleased to announce that recently she became a recipient of a Rufford Foundation grant, and she's also had grants like the ZSL Edge Fellowship. And these are all for her works on the conservation of dancing frogs in the Western Ghats of India. She spends most of her time writing scripts for distribution models and papers for scientific and popular science publications. So please, I'll hand over to Madhushri.
Please unmute yourself, Madhushri. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah. Good evening, everyone. I hope you all are able to see the presentation. I am a little jet lagged because I just flew back to India this morning, and yeah, I've not been keeping really well. But yeah, let's start the presentation. And thank you, Steve, for an amazing introduction, and Mansi for the invite. So I am going to speak about unraveling the secrets of Myristicaceae scotigarensis and about its habitat, distribution, and threats in the Western Ghats of India. If at any time I'm not clear, please do let me know so that I can, not go ahead and we can rectify that. I'm going to start with a video of what a Myristica swamp actually looks like. And this is from our fieldwork back in the years of 2018 to 2020, pre-COVID. And this was one of the swamp where we had extensively surveyed the dancing frogs. So just to begin with, a brief definition of what Myristica swarms are. They are actually a freshwater woody swamp forest, which are characterized by knee and stilt root systems, which is very common to the mangroves as well. And Myristica swarms are a type of a mangrove. They are dominated by these tree species, which are called as Myristicaceae, from the Myristicaceae family. They're basically nutmeg trees, and they are present across Western Ghats in all the states, including Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, and Kerala, mostly states which have moist evergreen forest patches. Some of the core attributes of Myristica swarms are that they are year-round waterlogged, and some of the swarms actually contain potable water. In fact, when we were surveying in one of the Myristica swarms in the Uttar Kannada district, I remember going in the swamp, the video that I just showed you all, and one of the community members, when we were walking across this waterlogged, roots system and within the swamp, he picked up a glass of water and he just scooped it through in the water in the swamp and just drank it. And he said that the water is absolutely pure over here. So it's actually potable water. And the vegetation, like I said, is mostly nutmeg trees. They are very tall, dense, canopy laden forests. The soils are deep alluvial black soils, and ecological uniqueness is because they have a lot of cultural significance, and they're also considered as living fossils or relic forests, which means they're ancient forest types. Even within the Western Ghats, the forest types are really old, and since it has cultural significance, so the ecological uniqueness also kind of increases. They are very high biodiversity conservation value areas. There are several faunal diversity within the Myristica swarms. Some of the mammals that we've often come through are the lion-tailed macaques and the Malabar giant squirrel, along with others. There are several bird species. I think approximately 129 species have been recorded, and one of my favorite is the Malabar trogon, which we have seen calling alongside the dancing frogs that we survey for this project. Of course, there are plenty of reptiles and then amphibians. So most of the stream-dwelling amphibians, like the night frogs, the bush frogs, which are under sub-canopy, and then the canopy frogs, which are the tree frogs, are all found within the swamp. What we are going to talk today are mostly the Myristicaceae frogs, also known as the dancing frogs, which is where I work on. And I'm going to show you the work that I've been doing from 2018 after getting funding from ZSL Edge for working on one of the species. So a little bit of introduction of what the dancing frogs are. They fall under this genus called Myristicaceae scientifically, so you have all the order, genus, family, etc. They are a separate family. They're endemic to only the Western Ghats of India, so they're not found anywhere else in the world. And they belong to a very ancient Anuran lineage and also live within relic forests like the Myristica swarms. So obviously, stressing on co-evolution because they are present in like old forest types. One of the very interesting things about the dancing frogs is that they are fifth among the top 10 most threatened amphibian genera in the world and still receive very little attention from Indian government or even across the world, despite of having occupied, the Western Ghats, which are global biodiversity hotspot. There are total 24 species, and 22 of the species are classified as threatened, which is they fall in the category of critically endangered, or vulnerable. Among these is the Myristicaceae cotigahensis. Cotigahensis comes from a village in India, Kotigaher, which is a type locality of this particular specimen. And it was actually discovered long back, pre-independence, but then through independence and post-independence era, until 2014, the frog was unknown. And so it was also previously tagged as an evolutionary distinct and globally endangered species. Now, these species are called as edge species. And after our surveys from 2018 to 2020 ongoing, they have been subsequently downlisted to a vulnerable category, the number one reason why I don't have funds today. And they were obviously rediscovered in 2014 after a very long taxonomic survey, but they were discovered only from 2 localities across the Western Ghats, 2 or 4 localities, I think, but very close by. So they still fell in the critically endangered, category. They are fossorial tadpoles. They have foot flagging behavior, which is why they are also called as dancing. And I'll show you the video later, but I have very little time, so I'm going to cover everything and then show you the video. They have very highly specific ecological niche requirements. So they're restricted to only perennial streams. Perennial streams are basically streams that are alive or where the water is flowing for all 12 months in a year. So of course, the water level differs, but they're restricted to freshwater ecosystems and also perennial streams or, swampy habitats like the Myristica swamps. So mostly what we do in our project is we look at the habitat preferences of the frog and its distribution and threats. And so we conduct, certain scientific surveys, which are time constrained, visual, auditory. They are along 10-meter transects and they last only for 60 minutes. We also do something called as a buccal swabbing for the DNA analysis across Western Ghats. So wherever we think as per the hydrology and as per the water basin of the river, we figure out where the frog could potentially be available and then go and survey those areas. And this includes the swamps as well. So largely my study site looks like this, and I would like a drop on one of the mountain peaks with a helicopter, but then we do not have funds for that. And so we do the next best thing, which is walking. So we just kind of walk these forests to figure out where we'll see the dancing frogs. And mostly if I survey like 10 streams, I'll find the dancing frogs only in 2 streams. That's how it is going so far. And what you see is like a panoramic view of the Western Ghats. And within these tropical forests is where the swarms are actually hidden. These are Shola Sky Islands. These are called as Shola Sky Islands because they are like a mosaic of grasslands plus like woody vegetations, which you can see over here. These are low elevation evergreen forests, which are also which carry like almost 90% endemic species given within the amphibian genus. You can see now we are just kind of zooming in from that photo, and this is my advisor for scale. He's standing on one of those peaks, and then behind him you can see the forest, and under the railway bridge is where the stream is. Okay, this is the stream usually where we see dancing frogs. And when we go closer in the stream, on those rocks is where the dancing frogs are present. And these are live photos of the frog. Throughout this study, we haven't killed, so to say, any species, because in my head, it did make sense to kind of kill critically endangered species, even if it meant for science. So we stuck to what is called as buccal swabbing, and then, used total genomic DNA from the swabs. We also reported the first fossorial live tadpole evidence of Myristicaceae cotigarensis, and these tadpoles, so one of the areas is from the swamp. So the D over here that you are seeing is from a Myristica swamp in the Uttar Kannada district. So A, B, and C are the species in amplexus. Then you have the female over here, which is she's trying to close the cavity after she has laid eggs. In the C plate, you can see the eggs. They're about 18 to 34 eggs within each cavity on an average. And that also kind of tells you why the species was critically endangered, because they do not lay like 100 to 200 eggs as we are aware of. Like we think in our heads that, oh, they're frogs, so they must be laying like 200 eggs at a given time. But that's not true for all frogs, and especially not true for, frogs with restricted range. So this was the first report that we reported in 2020 after its discovery of its live tadpoles. So based on our models, what we see is that most Myristicaceae cotigarensis, they prefer slow to fast flowing streams. That includes Myristica swamps. Most Myristica swamps that I have visited have had a kind of a flowing stream. And within those streams also, we've seen that the average stream depth and width are of a certain requirement. Otherwise, you do not see Myristicaceae. And also within those streams, they have to have rocky boulders, sand substratum, and leaf litter with an average of 1 inch, so that they have enough space for survival and for the territorial dance which they do on the rocks. And only within these kind of stream habitats is where we have seen the frog to be present. We also ran some models, and we estimated that the total population of the species is approximately 643 individuals. Of course, there are variations within sites, and at some sites, like the Myristica swamps, the abundance could be about 90 individuals, so 90 individuals per site. And there could be sites where the frog is present from 1 to 0, so only single male to no males at all. And it could be the same stream. So you have Myristica, it is flowing down the same stream, but at one place within the stream you have like 90 individuals, and then whereby you come down where there's no canopy or probably a mixing of of the stream, you find no individuals. And one of the very important things that our models kind of, after we ran the models, we found that there's a negative association with certain environmental parameters. And one of my very critical findings was the rock temperature, the association with the rock temperature. So what we found is that a negative association, which means that when the rock temperature increases, the presence of frog decreases. And that's kind of important when we talk about, climate change and how canopy cover is kind of important for the species survival. So even like 1 degree of change kind of shows that the frog cannot occupy those areas. Also, this is also very important, and it's also related to the swampy habitats. That the frog's presence is related to canopy cover. So there are areas where the abundance is rising from below 1 individual at about 30% canopy cover to 6 individual at about 95% canopy cover. And most of the Myristica swarms that we have surveyed shows about 80 to 95% canopy cover. And that's kind of important because within the swarms, because they're enclosed systems, you see that the canopy cover is intact. And that could be for several reasons, because obviously people are not allowed to enter there, and there's cultural significance and so on and so forth. But it also shows how, because of the canopy, because of the tall woody canopy, which is intact, the frog's presence is also intact. And frog abundance kind of increases significantly with canopy cover. We also did do what are called as the species distribution modeling, and then do a forecast of that model to show how it changes with changing climatic conditions. So we have moderate emission scenarios and high emission scenarios where there are absolutely no rules, and the emissions have gone up, which is what I think our future is going to be. So obviously in the maps it looks like the habitat is kind of increasing, but that's not the case, because the quality of the habitat is not directly related to the increase in the habitat that the frog has. So although it shows that as you go towards moderate to high emissions, the area kind of seems to be increasing, but it is also linked to the fact that the precipitation in Indian Peninsula is going to increase by about 5% to 13%. And that kind of shows, and the model cannot understand that, the rise in precipitation does not mean that the quality of the habitat is going to be maintained. And that's a very important finding. And what we also see is that despite of this increase within the habitats, the area within protected area is still decreasing. So we're not in a win-win situation anywhere. And another thing is that most of the Myristica swarms lie outside of the protected area boundaries, the legal protected area boundaries that we have in India. So they come under community forests or reserve forests and so on, but not within protected areas that are meant for conservation, or that are meant for the biodiversity to thrive and so on. So through our models, we see that endemic range-restricted amphibians are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change, which has been shown across Western Ghats as well. We also, for the first time,
sorry, Madhushri, we're approaching the time.
Yeah, just 2 minutes.
Okay.
This is the last slide. Yeah, we see there are lots of threats across these swarms, and I'm not going to go in the details of this, but I think Priya might be able to cover it more. But we see that the swarms are a very threatened habitat. These are some of the photos that I have, photographed within the site. So this was one of our stream sites where a road construction came up. And these were also some of the sites where several river linking projects have been coming up as well. So right now we've launched a website which is called dancingfrogs.in. I request you all to please go through and do let me know how you think about it. We think that it could, like the Myristicaceae could serve as a flagship species. This is a clipping of the website, and of course acknowledgement, because I don't do all the work by myself. I have a whole team that did the field work and also kind of helped me collect all the data. This is the video that I wanted to show in the beginning, but I knew I would run out of time, so I put it in my thank you slide. Yeah, with that, I'd like to end, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Madhushri. I would say at the minute, we'll save all of the questions for the end. I see there is one very relevant question already in the chat box.
Okay.
And if anybody has any questions, then please drop them into the chat box and we'll deal with them at the end. Hopefully we'll have a fair bit of time to look at those. A fantastic look. And of course, for a lot of people who are watching this later on, or who are part of our audience now, they may have no concept of what a Myristica swamp is. So it's important that right at the beginning, we had a look at a Myristica swamp and we laid down what it is exactly. And you also mentioned the person who took a glass of water direct from the swamp, and you saw how the water was, quote, absolutely pure. So all of these points are very important for considering not only the Myristica swamp itself, but also water security. And you touched on the bigger issues like protected areas, that most of these Myristica swamps are outside of protected areas. And I'm sure as we move on to our next speaker, we'll talk a little bit about how Myristica swamps are protected. And I have to pick up on a couple of points. It was a great list of the faunal diversity of Myristica swamps, but there were no fish. Ah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm very like I don't know anything about fish, so yeah, I kind of
but I'm so used to traveling around India. When I was with
yeah.
recently in Odisha with Ranjan Panda, and we went into the tiger reserve, and there was a huge board with a list of everything that lives in that tiger reserve, but there were no fish on the board. So I'm very used to that.
Yeah.
um, we'll come back later, I'm sure, with the questions, and I'll also recap on what we talked about in there. I would just like to pick up on a couple of things which are really common in conservation now. You mentioned several times funding. You mentioned this particular dancing frog was moved from a high threat category down to vulnerable. And with the squeeze on conservation funding over the last few years in particular, things have to be endangered or critically endangered for researchers to easily access funding. So just that move down to vulnerable, it's still a highly threatened category, but the access to funding is a huge issue. We will move on from there. Thank you once again, Madhushri. We'll talk to you again later. And I'll bring in now Gopakumar Menon, who is an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. He's worked as an investment professional over an 11-year period before, as he says, wisdom dawned. He's the founder of the Otter Conservancy that works to conserve otters and the riparian habitat. The ongoing project of the Otter Conservancy centres around the Asian small-clawed otter, a search for which led a team member to a small yet richly diverse Myristica swamp in the Sindhudurg district of Maharashtra. And this is the northernmost record of Myristica so far. Gopakumar is a senior facilitator and an ongoing liability, he claims, at Navgati, a leadership development firm. He's the author of 2 books of short stories, and he blogs very regularly in the faint hope that someone somewhere would read his work. And I would say that his work is very insightful, occasionally or mostly tongue-in-cheek. So please do subscribe to gopakumarmenon.substack.com if you want to know more about Gopa. So we'll move on, and it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend Gopakumar Menon.
So, thank you, Madhushri, for bringing up this issue of riparian habitat, which is so close to my heart. I think that's the big one. That's the big thing we all need to work on. But I'm going to tell you a story, and it's quite different from what Madhushri did. And this is about a Myristica swamp that a colleague of mine, Malhar, sort of stumbled into while we were looking for small clawed otters. And he was going with a researcher who, well, surprise, surprise, works on frogs, right? And then they both sort of stumbled on this swamp, and which was in the village. It was a sacred grove of that village, and it was quite small. It's just about a hectare in size. A hectare is a little over 2 acres, and it was and is in excellent was in excellent condition. I wouldn't know how it is now. I'm just changing the slide. I've just moved down, and what you can see, this tiny little swamp was, it had paddies on 2 sides, and this paddy field was there were a few houses by the paddy field, and they were praying at the swamp as well as harvesting their paddy. And we sort of realized that there was some conservation potential here, and quite different from what we were used to doing, which is looking at small clawed otters. We decided to take this up. It was, well, let me start by saying that there were 2 primary threats that we could easily identify. One was that you see the hills behind, and there was a missionary organization that had a large tract of land with rubber plantations in these hills, and they had impounded the water, which meant that the water supply to the Myristica swamp had reduced substantially over particularly the last decade. And the second threat, so this was a big threat, but a second and seemingly more urgent threat was that every year, just before the month of the holy festival, the month of March, the biggest Myristica tree in the swamp would be cut down. And it would be cut down and then carried in a procession to the temple, and then there would be some ceremonies done there, and it would be there for a year, and then the next year it would be replaced by the next biggest tree. But in the process of cutting it down, obviously there was a lot of collateral damage as well. There were other trees that also used to fall and so on. And when we checked with the locals, some of the elderly people in their 70s, 80s, they confirmed that the population of Myristica had and was declining. There was no doubt about it, along with some other RET species, rare, endangered, and threatened species like Holigarna and so on and so forth. There was a full list of those. And we also realized from the surrounding areas that the area under Myristica was originally probably about 4 to 5 times as large, if not much larger. I'm talking about in living memory, it probably was about 4 times larger, including some of these paddies, perhaps some part of these paddies. So what we really did was we decided to tackle this problem, or what we saw as the issue, by first building trust with the village. So we spent a fair bit of time. We worked with the kids, we talked to the local politicians, we tried to build a relationship with a temple priest. We also befriended, in fact, Steve was with me when we spent some time with the blokes who lived in the 3 or 4 cottages next to the Myristica swamp. Incidentally, when Madhushri was talking about all that wildlife that is there, here's one look from inside, and she's done a terrific job of telling you what the Myristica swamp is like. And we also came across my favorite bird, which is the fishing owl, the brown fishing owl, which is such a beautiful animal. And then then the two of us, these are the two villains in the picture that you see. And the two of us, actually, in 2019, we spent some time, but before that, I had visited the swamp a few times. I'd worked with the villagers along with my colleagues, but Steve came along as well. And then we spent a fair bit of time working with the community to build trust. And that meant really convincing them that our intention was extremely honorable. We wanted to help them to further protect it. What we were hoping was that at some point they would substitute the felling of the Myristica tree that they felled in the swamp with possibly another species. And we have seen examples of these in many parts of India. Some other species from outside the swamp, which is probably not on the endangered list, which is probably even a fairly common species. And there were such options that were even suggested at some points in time. But something went wrong. And now I'm coming to the cautionary part of it. Sometime around November one particular year, we realized that, trust building takes a lot of time. It takes effort. It takes multiple levels of engagement, and it's so personal. It's one to one. It's in the feel that you get about a person, right? And over the years, I've placed a lot of faith on that myself, and I could see that that was the way to go. But after about a year, we really hadn't made much headway. We were not getting anywhere. And then we were at these sort of crossroads where in November, December, we had to take a call on what to do, because in another couple of months, they would be talking about felling. And one of the sort of scientific advisors to us, who's a pretty senior academic, I mean, he had always been saying that, look, what they're doing is wrong. This is an endangered tree. They're not allowed to cut it. We've got to tell the forest department, which all of us had been avoiding. But it finally came to a point where we had to take this call. We had to ask ourselves, should we continue building trust, wondering how long this would take, years and years and years, or should we involve the department? Should we go to them and say, please help us, or please stop the felling, or what do you want to do? So somebody knew a very senior forest officer in Maharashtra, very senior guy. We got him on board. It was finally decided, and quite reluctantly from my side, but I was kind of conflicted in some sense. I really didn't know which way to go. And I decided to take that path on advice from an academic and a couple of other people. And then we finally got this person. He came in, took a look. he gave the orders. And then at the second level, after he left, we had a DFO who, to put it very, very mildly, wasn't a very clean guy, right? And he was playing dirty games. There's an old phrase, you run with the hare and you hunt with the hounds, which means you sort of play both parts. And he was really good at that. So he was playing some games here. And at the end of the day, he sort of convinced the village that this was not in your favor to have the tree cut, while communicating across that he was doing his best to stop the felling, right? So he was kind of playing both in some sense. What happened was very quickly, astonishingly quickly, things went sour. And it sort of became a battle of ego. It was a challenge that was almost, it was taken as a challenge to say that we will cut the tree, nobody can stop us. And as things stand, it's a battle we not only lost, we also had some collateral damage there too, which is that my colleagues who were on the field also ended up unfriending, if I may use a social media term, some of the people they were working with, which meant that one of them in particular was told, you're not at all welcome here again, don't come. And people who were working with us were told us, we can't go there again, or we can't raise this issue again. Now, the reason I'm taking this up, and I'm going to stop the presentation in just about a couple of minutes, is because there was a lot for me to learn. I have been a conservation volunteer. I've been working in conservation for years and years, and we know that when you work with people, trust is important. On the ground, it's not that simple. You've got to take a call sometimes, but there is, at the end of the day, no substitute for trust and empathy. To me, that was a big learning, looking at it from their point of view. And perhaps it would have taken many years, but we could have built trust. Perhaps we should have worked on the other issue, the issue of water flow, in which they were aligned with us because they really felt that the plantation was not doing the Myristica any good. Perhaps we should have taken that, which is a much more longer term battle, rather than looking at a short term win. So looking at the war rather than the battle, building trust and empathy, I think these were the key learnings that I took away. And on that note, Steve, I would like to stop the presentation, but I'm very happy to take questions at the end, as might possibly happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gopar, and some very important points addressed there. And there are some questions coming into the chat box, which is good to see. So I'm keeping tabs on the questions as they arise. Anybody who's just joined the webinar, I see a few people jumped in the last 2 to 3 minutes, then please drop questions into the chat box and we'll have time for those at the end, I'm sure. So when I first laid out the idea for this webinar, I wanted to first of all look at one of the things that lives inside a swamp. So we had the dancing frogs from Madhushri. And then I wanted to look at the bigger picture of how do people live around swamps? And in particular, because this is my experience of the kind invitation of Gopa for me to visit this swamp with him. And we met the farmer who lives alongside that swamp and he plants the paddy there. And he actually said to us that over his recent lifetime, while he was growing hybrid rice varieties with heavy fertilizer use, he had seen a decline in the insects, in crabs living in his paddy fields, what had happened with butterflies, birds, etc. So he had seen the impact of farming upon his farm, but also then clearly upon the Myristica swamp. And the image I have stuck in my head as well is of fairly close to this river, which is fed in part by the swamp. There was a pineapple plantation, and those pineapples spread as far as the eye could see, going right up a hill. I took a really nice photo of that. So yes, we have to, as Gopal was alluding to there, see the bigger picture in terms of the landscape, what surrounds the swamp, not just the swamp itself, but also then that real thorny issue of what happens when we do conservation. Who are we doing conservation for? who are we doing conservation to? And certainly in my field, we have critically endangered and endangered fish species, which are a common food source, very often for indigenous peoples. So they themselves are threatened. So who are we to say we can take those things away from them? We have to offer alternatives, or we have to take this really long, slow and steady course of building trust, exactly as Gopa laid out in his presentation there. I'll give a bit more of a recap later on when we get to the end, but thank you once again for that. And we'll move on to speaker number 3, and we will look at the far bigger picture of what happens, or how do we go beyond not only the Myristica swamp and the landscape that surrounds it, but how do we talk to people across the entire nation or even the whole world? So I'm going to introduce shortly Priya Ranganathan, who is a doctoral student at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, commonly known as ATRE, based in Bengaluru, where she studies the eco-hydrology and the ecosystem services of Myristica swamps. She recently published the first book on the biodiversity of Myristica swamps and manages a project to restore degraded swamps in Uttara Kannada. Priya is an avid science communicator and runs a children's e-magazine, Youth for Nature. And I would say definitely check out her website. We will track that down and add it in the chat box very shortly. I didn't make a note of that because there's a blog there, and several of these things mention not only the Myristica swamp, the biodiversity, biodiversity inside the Myristica swamp, but also how these things affect the landscape around. So it is my pleasure to introduce Priya Ranganathan.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I'll just share my screen quickly. Is it full screen right now?
It is.
All right, perfect. So thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to both of the other speakers as well. Madhushri and I, of course, know each other from ATRE, but I've never met Gopakumar sir, so it's really exciting to have heard about his work in swamps as well in the northern Western Ghats. And today I'm going to, yes, take you a little broader into the world of outreach and how someone coming from science is trying to work in the realm of outreach, and the pros, the cons, the little bit about the journey of that. And of course, talk about the book a bit more, as Steve had mentioned. But today, I want to also emphasize the fact that outreach and communication is for everyone. It's not something that you have to be specialized or trained in. And it's sometimes the side that I think we as science students or scientists may not consider as worthwhile. Sometimes we think that, we're so buried in our research and we're so passionate about what we do that we fail to see that without sharing that information to the larger audience, sometimes it loses a bit of its meaning and a bit of the impact, which at the end of the day is something in conservation you do want. You want impact. So briefly, I'm going to call my presentation today The Swamp Story, Telling Stories of an Untrodden Ecosystem. At this point, it's been well-trodden. I think both of our speakers have given a fantastic overview to Myristica swamps. So that has saved me a lot of background. And we can take you right into the broader picture. So let's go. So quickly, why do we do outreach and conservation in the field of science? So science generates knowledge, right? We have data collection is the major, coming up with a hypothesis, coming up with observations, writing up our findings, publishing them. That's the process of science. And outreach, however, is the unseen part of the story, where outreach actually gives it meaning. So I'm trying to, of course, broaden out beyond just scientific papers. When I say outreach, we mean public engagement. So conservation cannot just survive alone on data, and it needs public support. And that's really where the idea of being able to communicate science, engage with people, whether it's the communities that actually live near these ecosystems, or whether it's the larger worldwide community or the larger Indian community that may either play the role of donors one day or may play the role of supporters or policymakers and engage with these ecosystems in a broader sense. Or maybe it's just the people who hear about these ecosystems and species and are fascinated by them and leave with more knowledge than they entered. So engaging communities in particular empowers them to protect what is theirs. And I do want to move away a little from the idea of saying that people need other outsiders to come in and tell them how to manage their resources, because that isn't the idea behind outreach. The idea is that I come in with a totally different perspective as a researcher. I build an entire picture in my head of what a Myristica swamp is and what are the issues, what is the ecology, what is the ecohydrology. And then as I interact with the people who actually live next to these ecosystems, the people who protect them, the people who interact with them, the people who have to deal with the challenges of living next to these systems, I learn from them as well. So it's a dialogue. I share my findings, they share their findings and understanding. And we come up with a consensus together. We come up with a story together. So it's really important to then remember that storytelling, education to an extent, both ways, the education of the researcher and the education of the people who live near the swamp, as well as dialogue, build bridges between science and society. And what I've come to realize is when I worked, especially in the realm of ecosystem services of Myristica swamps during data collection for the past few years of my PhD, I've noticed that many people have a single faceted view of a swamp. So if I collect water from the swamp, I know the swamp exists as a source of water, but I may not know many other aspects of it. And some people may just have heard of them as, oh, that's a tourist destination. Many people come here. But again, there's not really a link to that ecosystem as, oh, this is something imperative for my larger well-being. So even the people who live near swamps, the people who we think engage with them daily, may not necessarily know them and really understand why they're important in the two people who don't live in the ecosystem. So why would someone coming from Bangalore care about a Myristica swamp? That part of the story is a little unclear still. So why then do these ancient relic systems, as Madhushri called them, need us? What is the purpose of this kind of outreach? So despite their high ecological and hydrological significance, swamps are India's least studied and known wetlands. So we have a lot of different types of wetlands across the country. And actually, Myristica swamps for the longest time have been classified and managed as forests. I mean, they fall under the Forest Department's jurisdiction, and they are forested wetlands. But wetland often escapes the definition. And the reason this is important is we have to remember it's not just a place where trees are found, but it's a place where water is found. And that means the way people interact automatically is going to change. We're not having people just come in and fell trees. We're not having people come and harvest, NTFP, non-timber forest products. But we're also having people come in for water. We're having people come in for irrigation purposes. And that's an entirely different realm of interaction. And sometimes it can be more invasive in some ways. So it impacts the conservation of these systems. So there are so many different dimensions to what makes a swamp unique. We have the ecosystem services for the local communities. We have the unique hydrology of swamps, which is governed by where they're placed in the landscape. So swamps are found in the upstream reaches of these tiny streams, first order streams as we call them, and second order streams, that go and form the larger river basins. They flow into the larger rivers like the Aghanashini River and Sharavati River in Uttar Kannada. Then we have immense biodiversity, and frogs was just one aspect of it that Madhushri covered in detail. There are so many different species that are covered that are found in swamps. And also, of course, there's cultural significance across generations and sometimes the loss of cultural significance between generations as well. And what I really want to highlight here is with these different dimensions, what one person values, another person may not know. So I may come in knowing about the hydrology and ecosystem services, but have very little knowledge of the culture. People may be immersed in the cultural significance because that's their reality, but they're not aware of the biodiversity. Others come in, photograph the biodiversity. They may not know about the hydrology and why the biodiversity depends upon that hydrology. So these are all the different parts of the picture, but how do we link them together? So at the end of the day, what we have to remember is you can't really protect what you don't know exists. And science does need storytelling to make meaning. So So now I come a little more to the more personal side of this, which is the book. I have it here in my hand, but conveniently on the screen. So The Dark Forest, an illustrated guide to the biodiversity of Myristica swamps. And while I have written the text and a lot has gone into the research, which I'll go into, the illustrations that have really brought this book to life are by Meera Fadnis, who is a bachelor student, an undergraduate student, let's call it, in California, USA. And she's also my cousin. So this has been a very special journey for me as a big sister as well as a researcher. But the point of this book was trying to make the invisible more visible. So when I was doing research, I mean, a part of a PhD is immersing yourself in the landscape and spending a lot of time looking at the different aspects of the ecosystem, not just what fits into the research questions. And I collected a lot of moments in my field diary that inspired me, but didn't really fit into the larger research. So we have these lovely blocks of hydrology, services, threats, and I was working on all of that. And then I realized that so many conversations, so many observations that deserve to be told were not actually showing up in my research papers. They weren't really showing up in my data analysis. And analysis is just a drier side of this, but there were so many interesting quotations and interesting stories that I wanted to highlight, and I just didn't know where to do that. And there were so many species that I came across in swamps and people mentioned. And as someone who's, as well, biodiversity has traditionally been very well documented in Myristica swamps comparatively, as far as research goes. So I was omitting it as part of my research objectives. So, but how do I capture then this mystery, this mystic value that the biodiversity in these swamps, these hidden species that are found here, that they hold for people? So that was all what was going on in my mind. I wanted to capture the attention also of people who never actually see a swamp in real life, but may value the existence of such ecosystems, which we call the existence value. It's an intangible value, an intangible ecosystem service of such ecosystems. And also, I was wondering a bit more and working more with the larger policy implications of outreach. So in order to join the fight to protect a system, to restore a system, to conserve, whether it's through you're paying towards the conservation, you're funding conservation projects, or maybe you're volunteering as part of one, you need to care. And I was working with the forest department extensively in Uttar Kannada. I was working with local communities. We began a restoration project on the ground, and I realized that, you know, people do need to care. We need to justify to people why they're being involved and why they actually matter. So the goal of the book then was to convey people emotionally to a landscape that most would never visit. And I did go into writing this book with the idea that people who read the book may not necessarily be the people who were interacting with swamps on a daily basis. The book is illustrated, and that's in part to convey the magic and mystery of swamps through artwork and not photographs. So, of course, there are fantastic photographers out there. Many have helped me in this project. But I wanted it to be something a little more organic, something a little more evocative. And that's where interacting with Meera, the artist, really came in handy, because she has a very unique style of artwork where she looked at the photographs and she used digital art and she used color palettes that I honestly, as someone who's not an artist, could never have considered using. And she brought this ecosystem that she herself has never seen to life, just through, you know, immersing herself, whether it was through watching videos about Myristica swamps, whether it was, you know, through all the photos I was sending her, all the videos I was sending her from the field, listening to talks on swamps, reading whatever papers she could, just trying to immerse herself and then convey that through art. The intended audience of the book also, you have to keep in mind when I say illustrated, is they're not necessarily scientists. I mean, it's wonderful if scientists are interested, but they're the ones who maybe have access to the papers, right? The scientific research. But naturalists, people who are just curious to know what is a swamp, children, teachers, maybe even policymakers who are outside the field of ecology, were the people I had in mind when I came up with this book. And broadly, the process, I mean, this is maybe a process that outreach in general takes. So that's why I'm going into it. So one, of course, extensive field visits. And that doesn't just mean collecting data, but it also means observing, just sitting for hours and looking, immersing yourself, the sounds, the sights, the smells of the swamp, the emotion you feel when you're in this ecosystem, when you see a species that first, oh my God, what is this? Do I know it? That feeling has to come out in the book as well, so that people can connect to it. So all of that was a really important component of field visits. Conversations, of course, with experts and scientists, because whatever information has showed up in this book has to be scientifically backed. It cannot just be me writing from the top of my head. Testing content on young readers was another fun part. So visiting schools, and in the case of in Karnataka, we did a lot of translations. We made posters based on the book, different species in the book, and we piloted different versions of how casual, how light should the text be, and we discussed it with children who were one of the focus groups. Then we shared it with naturalists, versions of the book with naturalists, and asked them, what would you want to see added? What do you think is unnecessary? Students from master's programs as well. Atri has its own master's program, so tested it on a few students. And of course, testing it on Meera herself was a really fun part of the process, as someone who'd never seen a swarm. And now I just want to move a little more away even from the book itself, which is the idea behind the book, yes, is to engage the wider public. But we're also trying to work with local communities as well. We're engaging the communities who live both near and far from swamps. So broadly pulling back, what do we do when we call it local engagement? So walks with school children. So this is where I have a lot of now contacts in Uttar Kannada who are working extensively on outreach programs in schools. So going to schools, talking with the children, putting up posters, distributing Kannada copies. We're trying to actually we've translated the dark forest into Kannada, which is the local language in Sirsi where I work, and trying to distribute copies in schools so that children can actually relate to these systems, and we can learn from them as well and their experiences. Using mixed media, so whether it's art, using quizzes and written experiments, then teaching kids how to keep nature journals, so that they can engage as well with these systems with these ecosystems. Then conversations with people, just talking with elders about changes to swamps that they've witnessed in their lifetime. Of course, involving the local language. I am not a Kannadiga, but that's where it takes a village. So I have had immense help, and I will acknowledge all of them at the end, from people who have come and helped me with my research, helped me with my interviews, helped with the outreach components in schools. And it's been an amazing journey, just because I've gotten to immerse in a landscape and language that aren't mine, but now feel like mine as well. And of course, our restoration project that's going on, we've been doing this for the past year, trying to restore a degraded Myristica swamp, also do the larger research on the threats to the swamps, and involve local communities as well as the forest department, so that we have a holistic approach to restoration. It's not just us planting trees, which is the traditional model of restoration, but it's us seeing what the stakeholders on the ground need and how best to involve them in long-term conservation, long-term maintenance of this system. And then broadly, again, the wider engagement that I'm trying to involve in. So I love to write popular science articles and blogs. I run my own blog on life and wildlife, which is my website. And I think that will be shared by Mansi in the chat. The book, of course, was written in English, and now it will be in Kannada as well. So thankfully, maybe we can get it in other languages eventually. Marathi, Konkani, Malayalam would be great starts, because these are all places where you find Myristica swamps still. Trying to work on some children's books and stories of swamps, both on in my magazine, but also just picture books. And again, hoping to work with Meera on this. I love talking with kids. So workshops in schools in Bengaluru has been a really fun aspect of my work. And it's sometimes more fun than the research, I will say, because I feel like I'm dealing with an entirely different ballgame. It's works a different side of the brain, and it makes me appreciate my field even more as I go on. And of course, webinars and lectures on swamps and conference presentations, because it makes you appreciate how people around the world who don't have any interaction with these systems appreciate them and are interested in their conservation as well. It gives you more meaning to your work. It makes me feel at least that there's scope for engaging people. There's so much scope for involving people who, and it validates the fact that I myself, who never lived next to a Myristica swamp growing up, am involved with these systems so deeply. So some final thoughts before I leave you. Science alone cannot save ecosystems. Connection and compassion must follow. Stories, art, books, conversations, these are things that make rare locations like Myristica swamps visible and valued to more people. And everybody, I just want to really emphasize this for our audience today, everybody, researchers, artists, teachers, students, and well beyond, have a role to play in conservation storytelling. Even if you go away from these presentations and you talk a little about the dancing frog, you talk a little about what's going on in swamps in Maharashtra with tree felling and the cultural side of it. If you go away and you just say, hey, maybe I should check out this book on swamps, you are a part of the story. You are spreading that story to a larger audience, and that matters, and we appreciate it in the field of research. And outreach at the end of the day is essential. So if you are in the science field, don't dismiss it. It changes hearts, influences decisions, mobilizes communities, and also, yes, it gets you funds. So, if you want to be in research and you want to do long-term research, don't dismiss the power of outreach and communication. So with that, quickly, the acknowledgements. Of course, Meera, who is pictured here, who is the illustrator. The research, so Kannada language research had to be done, of course, extensively with interviews. Rohan, Sudhanva, Chandan, Dhananjay, Manoj, Amatya, Shri Harsha, Guru, and Harisha. These were just some of the people who were trekking through these swampy forests with me, who sat for hours in villages and talked with people, introduced me, so I did not stick out like a sore thumb, who went through versions of the book, who helped me with the local names for some of these species and developing Kannada posters. I also have to give a special shout out to Vanya Hegde, who is the one who just translated, just as of yesterday, finished translating the book into Kannada. She has been an immense help, and she's a very enthusiastic student at Azim Premji University. And she's also from Uttar Kannada. So it's very important that someone local is able to translate and keep the local language, keep the local species names, everything. So that was something I wanted. And she's really brought this to life in Kannada as well. So really excited for the next step. Of course, from the advisory side, my PhD guides, Dr. Ravikant from ATRI and Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy from IIHS, and Dr. Jagdish MR in the Forestry College Sirsi, who is a part of my doctoral advisory committee, who has been of immense value in helping me with the research, the field logistics, and finding people to come and do research with me, all the field, the research assistants. Of course, the funding, I was really lucky to receive the Prakriti Research Fellowship for 2 years, 2022 to 24, and that helped me with the initial surveys in the field. The Society for Wetland Scientists Student Research Grant in 2024 has also really helped me with whether it's equipment, some funding for, doing more threat mapping, doing hydrology research in the field, and developing the science side. And Rubric, which has really donated and worked towards helping with this book itself, specifically the outreach component, and our restoration project. And of course, I can't forget the institutional backing, ATRI, Manipal, both of which are giving the PhD degree to me, hopefully at some point. The College of Forestry, Sirsi, and the Karnataka Forest Department. Without these last two, especially, nothing would have been possible in the field. It really takes a village.
Thank you so much, Priya. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Kept a nice QR code in case anyone wants to visit the website. It might be easier than typing it out.
Okay,
So,
keep that there for a second. I'll just quickly wrap up so we can move into some questions. So we're running over time a little now. So I just wanted to recap by saying this whole idea that there is more to research than just the data. And as you touched on there, and as people have said previously in the W4W sessions, this whole idea of dance, song, writing, art, pictures, so graphic art, etc. All of these things are very valuable conservation tools, which quite often are not captured or very difficult to reflect in dry scientific journals, exactly as you mentioned.
Sorry
and then also
to
that
interrupt.
idea.
Just sorry to interrupt. Sorry, Priya, will you please close your presentation, please? Thank you.
yes.
Over to you, Steve. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. And just finally to say as well, a reflection how I opened the whole session by saying we don't all work on the big picture. We have to communicate with other people as well. So you said what one person values, another may not even know. So that's such an important thing to take away. I was going to mention Mira for the illustrations, but you did that as well. And also then to mention in Madhushri's presentation, the cartoons are, of course, by the very well-known Rohan Chakravarti from Green Humor. So check him out, yes. And illustration is a very important part of outreach. It's how we tell those stories. I'm going to move straight into questions. If anybody else has questions, please drop them in the chat box. And I'll start straight away. I have the list here somewhere. So question for Madhushri. We've been looking at your frogs, some of which are highly threatened. I would say it's, in some ways, it's a double-edged sword, but it's great to have 22 out of 24 species which are in a highly threatened category. For my work, half of all the known species are all data deficient, which makes it incredibly difficult. But the question, Madhushri, is what actually happens if your dancing frogs go extinct? So can you answer that?
It's a great question, actually. Most of the biodiversity loss and the disappearance of species is linked to several ecosystem services disappearing from the world. So when the World Economic Forum is talking about biodiversity loss as one of the risks to humankind itself, we cannot afford to lose more species to the ongoing biodiversity loss. So of course we lose like a critical link between the food chain, but we also lose like the value of each of the species and what it could provide to us. So it's possible that when a frog is present in a swamp habitat, it's probably reducing the population of mosquitoes or pests, or even responsible for cleaning the water in itself, and we do not know enough about it. So when I started my research, I tried to focus on one species, because it's important that we don't kind of look at everything when we talk about biodiversity loss, and kind of streamline to understand what happens if one species go extinct. So when we looked at our data, we saw that it has this several ecological niche requirements, which means that it also kind of has links to have that ecosystem to be functioning in a certain way. And I think that's really important. Of course, like now bees are disappearing because they're disappearing in like big numbers. And so we've seen the loss ourselves, and the farmers are complaining because they have to self-pollinate. So when certain things disappear, we cannot really like fathom what will happen. But it's kind of a critical loss that all of us have to pay for eventually. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like a world where children have to grow up. I mean, I'm sad now only that the world is like this. But 20 years from now, I think the world is only going to progress in a way which won't be very friendly towards us and our own survival. So we will be paying in terms of bad air quality, in terms of our own health, and so on. And therefore, it's important that we conserve certain species. We focus on what is important at this point, and that we have research data to kind of back up, so that we do not have to see a day when it's like disappeared or that it has gone extinct. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And from my side, I would say as well that there are clear parallels as well. So you can take lessons from what you're discussing into what things affect us. So you mentioned the canopy cover is important for the frogs. And clearly, as we lose canopy cover, either because of deforestation or diversions of rivers, or perhaps purely because of climate change, so the rock temperature rises, which you said is a critical factor for the success of those frogs.
Yes.
And a lot of people are talking about the heat island effect in urban surroundings, in cities, towns, etc. So they're being affected by the things which are affecting the frogs. So sometimes maybe the outreach story is to draw those parallels and say, you're suffering from this. Look at what the frogs are suffering as well.
Yeah.
I'll move on to Gopa now, and actually 2 questions. So the first question is, do you know what is actually the reason for cutting the largest Myristica tree in the swamp, which I believe, if my memory serves correct, was an annual event? And then as a follow-on question, subsidiary question, what is the way forward to try to change behaviors? Can we try to change those behaviors for people living around the swamps who feel, for whatever reason, hopefully you'll enlighten us, they need to cut the largest tree in the swamp? You're on mute at the minute.
Thank you, Steve. So yes, so the first question was by Madhushri, and Madhushri, I'll chat with you about this in greater detail sometime. But
You have to get the mic. Sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
it's a religious practice that, from all accounts, is less than 100 years old. The origins of the practice are not clear. We spent a lot of time trying to understand it. And we thought if we go to the root cause of understanding it, perhaps we could. But the origins are shrouded in mystery. So as you know, in religion, one of the challenges is people derive a practice for reason X, which then over 30, 40 years gets shrouded in mystery and myth and legend and superstition and belief, right? And then the version that you get, which is normally version 17.0, will be completely at variance from the origin of the reason for cutting the tree, which is exactly what happened. The second question, and I think there's somebody else, I think Mansi has put this question as well with Steve's talk. I'm kind of taking Steve's question into how do you really take this forward? So my view and is very much in sync with Priya's and Madhushri's view, which is it's very simply, if you're dealing with the non-megafauna, if you're dealing with not with elephants and tigers and rhinos and leopards and the non-megafauna, it's people, people, and people, right? With the megafauna, there are various reasons why we need to engage with the forest department in a much more deeper way. But with the non-megafauna, I don't think it's even a question, for the simple reason that even where the forest department is got the best of intentions, they lack the funds and the manpower and the knowledge, right? And there's an old saying that when a person has a hammer, everything in front of that person looks like a nail, right? And in many ways, that defines the way certain departmental initiatives are taken, right? Control and command does not work when it comes to non-megafauna conservation. Full stop. Trust me, because I've learned it the hard way, right? And there's gray hair to further fulfill, to strengthen that view. So there you are. Okay. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to take, I think, one more question. I'd just like to acknowledge, though, Anirudhan for posting in the chat box there. So we've covered now, between all of us, the Myristica swamps, virtually the entire length of the Western Ghats, certainly through Maharashtra. We haven't really touched on Goa, but I have visited Myristica swamps in Goa, and we were trying to organize an educational program in Goa, which keeps hitting various brick walls. I'll get back to that over the winter, I'm sure. And clearly Karnataka, with both Priya and Madhushri, and also now Anirudhan, who has been working in Kerala on the Myristica swamps as well. And also then he mentions, or Anirudhan mentions, about the lesser known fauna, those which are less than 1 millimeter. So we go from there to the dancing frogs, and then the fish, which are part of what I do, the otters, which Gopa has worked on, and the humans who live around the Myristica swamps. So we've probably covered quite a huge amount of the biodiversity in and around Myristica swamps. So we'll go to the final question from Namita, who asked, what were the major challenges you faced while communicating the ecological importance of Myristica swamps? So this is for Priya. What were the major challenges in the communication about the ecological importance? So you did cover working with the locals and also then the bigger picture. So can you summarize what are those major challenges, Priya?
Yeah, briefly, I think they are one, the language barrier, if any. In my case, especially, that was a huge hurdle in the beginning. Also, not coming across as just that person who sits in the corner and takes notes and nods enthusiastically while letting others actually have the conversation. So, trying to be involved in the conversation despite being an outsider. However, that means sometimes awkwardly inserting yourself into the conversation and into the picture. Lots of reliance on other modes of communication, like using gestures, using illustrations, using photographs, instead of just relying on words. So I think I broadened my knowledge of how to communicate science in the process. And learning how to, I think, rely on others and take help and say that you don't, yeah, one in the ecological side, maybe I don't know everything. So I do have to take someone who's an expert ecologically along to help in communicating. And yeah, it's okay to work in a team. It's okay to not be the person who handles everything alone. And yeah, that's part of the experience.
Thank you so much. Yes, of course. Back to that same thing, that even if we're focused on one very specific thing, we still have to recognize all of these connections around us. Which leaves me to summarize what we've been doing here, what we've been talking about. We started with Madhushri, who introduced the swamp to us, that showed us what the swamp looks like, and talked about the frogs in particular. So we had a very specific conservation focus, but also touched on some of the big issues which affect conservation as a whole. For all of us here, we're talking about conservation of fresh water, but some of these issues are constant, whether we're dealing with forests or grasslands or mountains or oceans. Some of these questions are still real about the impacts of climate change. How do we get funding? How do we know exactly what these things are that we're working on? And if not, how do we change the messages around these so that we know we can get some funding? And then we looked a bit more at the swamp itself and how people interact with the swamp. And as Gopa said, some of these Myristica swamps in living memory have reduced in size. So the one we looked at in particular, which Gopa and I walked through together, in living memory, this is now 4 times smaller than it was in those days. So it's a tiny little swamp. But also then, how do we address how the locals live with that swamp? Are they living in harmony with their surroundings? And if not, how can we, or should we even, try to change those behaviors? And then to wrap up the whole thing, we went with Priya, and then we're looking at how do we take these messages not only to the local community so that they understand the landscape they are living with and the importance of that landscape for themselves, from what I would say as that water goes downstream. So what they do is important for everybody who lives downstream of them. So those messages have to go out in the water context, but also then the bigger picture, locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. How do we communicate the importance of these things? How do we get support for these things we're trying to do? And we need support, because these fascinating primeval relic forests still deserve much more intensive conservation focus. There's still a lot we don't know about them, except we do know they are important. I don't know how and why mangroves exist all around the world, but these specific freshwater mangroves are only on the west coast of India. And as these vital swamps are lost, so too India loses an important cultural and biological heritage habitat. So we do need to do something. It's a very big thank you from me to everybody at the W4W team. Today we're being Wednesdays for Water, but of course the team changes its name to suit the context. It could be We for Water, it could be Women for Water, it could be Who for Water, but we are definitely, or should be, all for water. So thank you very much from me, and I'll hand you over to Mansi to wrap up the whole session.
Thank you so much, Steve, for this wonderful session and hosting it so wonderfully. And thank you so much again to our speakers, Madhushri Mudke, Gopakumar Menon, and Priya Ranganathan, for their insights into the Myristica swamps or forest, as we call it. Last but not the least, we would also like to thank all the participants before and today for their support and encouragement to make these water conversations meaningful as we are inching towards 400 sessions, including Wednesdays for Water, Friday Waters, and Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water. And many a times people actually mistake W for W as Wednesdays for Water, which is a proud feeling for us. but we have nearly 11 Ws to work on water, and rightly mentioned by Steve, as V for Water starts, and this is a small way that we can contribute. Before I leave you with a lot of memories from the past, which look at our 300 plus sessions overview, but at the same time, I would like to announce you some very similar outstanding and interesting sessions forthcoming. This Friday, which is July 18, we have Friday Water Arts session. And we have a very interesting artist, Indrajit Sinha, who is going to talk about what water commons taught him. And the joining link is in the chat box, and also it will be there on our website. Next week, we also continue with the Biodiversity Series in Wednesdays for Water, with Saki Waters co-hosting the session in season 2. And that's July 23 at 5 p.m. And we are actually going again into the water, talking about understanding green seas and insights from the world of dugongs. And again, the link is available to you. With this Monday, we are now also having Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water, which is July 21st. At 5 p.m. IST, we shall interact and understand to acknowledge and appreciate the life of women in the water. And we have Dr. Swati Ganeshan, and the link is also available. Do keep checking our social media accounts and website for regular updates. I had my own questions for the session, but we are running out of time, and I'm reserving the questions for Steve because he has promised me more sessions from his side. So I'm looking forward to having more sessions on Mystica. I think one important lesson for me is that life underwater is invisible for humans, and that also means that it is also having less attention of humans, because we inhabit the land, and that is where land has more value, and we are also more concerned about the life on land. Not that we are really concerned, because if tiger can be threatened, any species can be threatened. So that's a benchmark for me as a common person. Thank you so much for enlightening. I will wait for the fishes to arrive in Steve's next session. Thanks all of you, and please take care of yourself. Stay wet, but at the same time, please continue the water conversation. We are a minority in this world of development where we talk about water. We need to connect with each other, and we need to let the conversation flow just like the water flows. Thank you so much, all of you. Take care.